This is Susie Maglich in the design group. I'm here with Anna Robinson, and I'm just going to kind of open it up, give everybody a little bit of background, and then I'm going to hand it off to Casey, and she's going to walk you through the process. But I wanted everybody to know, first of all, thanks to everybody who called in today. This is great attendance. I wanted everybody to know that the accessibility policy that we've had for years now hasn't changed. So with this process in I-Beam, all we're really doing is taking our existing policy and process that we had in Lotus Notes, and we migrated it over to I-Beam. So in terms of the policy, you know, our projects are still hiring a third-party accessibility consultant. That consultant is coming out. They're reviewing the drawings at the DD phase. They're reviewing the drawings at CDs. And then they're actually coming out to the site, doing a site visit during framing, and then they're doing a final site walk. And with each of those reviews, that consultant is still producing a report, and we're still, you know, having to go through the report and address any citations that Avalon feels is necessary to fix. So all of that has stayed the same, and Casey's going to show you what that now looks like in the I-Beam process. And we're just really excited that it now lives in I-Beam instead of Lotus Notes, because we can now track everything. All the reports are housed in there in a way that we can track the line items, so we know we haven't missed anything. And you know, everything's pretty automated, and we're having the consultants do, you know, a lot of the uploading work for us. So she's going to go through all that with you, and thanks again for joining. Anna and I are here throughout the call to answer any questions about, you know, accessibility in general or the policy, and Casey's going to be your point person on any questions you have on I-Beam. So take it away, Casey.
Thank you, Susie. All right, so I appreciate Susie's opening comments to color and give you some more context. If you're not familiar with utilizing the GoToWebinar, just a few things. Number one, you have your webinar panel in front of you. Everybody's muted, and at this point there are 50 of us on the line. So that way we won't be speaking over each other, but there is a question panel where you can type in your questions, and we'll handle the questions at the end as we go. If I catch something that's immediate while I'm walking through something, I'll speak to it, but feel free to enter your questions there. If you use the chat feature as opposed to the question feature, I might miss it because they're two different windows for me. Also, you'll see handouts. So there are 4 handouts. The system allows 5, so that's why it says 4 or 5 in there maybe in your panel. But those handouts are there for you. They were also in the invitation update that I just sent out. So you're welcome to retrieve all of that information there as well. We'll walk through a brief overview, just some main high-level points, and then we'll actually walk through creating the Accessibility Obligation BP, and then the Accessibility Review BP. And the Accessibility Obligation is really like a scheduler. It's saying we're obligated on a certain date to do the review. And then the obligation record holds that date to kick off the Accessibility Review BP. And you'll see what we mean as we walk through this. So the ABB accessibility policy, as Susie mentioned, remains unchanged. Creating a project or the form that you did in Lotus Notes, posting reports, viewing reports, and the sign-offs are all done now in I-Beam. And the existing projects that are in Lotus Notes remain in Lotus Notes, but any new projects moving forward should use I-Beam for their accessibility reviews. And if you're not sure which you are for your project, Susie and Anna can help us decipher that. Just as a quick reminder, you'll hear me say BP, that's a business process in I-Beam. So at a super high level, what takes place is that obligation, the scheduler, is created with a date. And then based on that date, the review record will kick off. Both the Accessibility Obligation BP and the Accessibility Review BP are found on the Community tab. And that's new for us. Most of you are used to working directly on the Project tab. So what you see right now are the breadcrumbs where it says Avalon Bay, Avalon Public Market, and then you can see it again. The one in the center is the actual community. So if you're ever on a project, you can just backstep to get to the community. And here on the community tab, you can see accessibility. And when you expand, you'll see review and obligation. Again, the accessibility obligation record is a scheduler, and it's created by the dev admin, the dev manager, or the construction PM. The accessibility obligation record is what kicks off the accessibility review task on the specified date. Then that task routes based on the type. So if it's a DD or a CD review, it will kick off to the development or redevelopment manager. If it's framing or final, it will kick off to the construction PM. From there, you will forward it on to your consultants, be it Environetics or Endelman, and they will add all of the action items. Now, this part's really important. They won't see the task until it's sent to them. They won't see anything in the system regarding this until you kick that task over to them to take action. And then once they've added their action items, the record routes as appropriate. So it would either go to, again for DD or CD, back to the development or redevelopment manager. And if it's framing or final, then it would go on to the construction PM. So let's talk about our first piece in this. It's accessibility obligation. And again, this is created by the dev admin or dev manager and the PM. It's not a workflow. There's no approvals. So it can be edited by the creator. You can just go in and out. So let's take a look in iBeam. Give me one moment while I switch it over. And so I'm going to go into the training database. And give me 1 second, I see a question. All right. So I'm going to log in as a development admin. And it's up to you on your project teams who's responsible for this task, right? It could be the development admin, it could be the construction PM based on the type, it could be the development manager. And I am on the community. So let's talk briefly about communities versus projects. I'm going to click this plus mark here to bring up a new tab. And if I were to type in, I'm just going to type in Solana for purposes of showing this. You can see that there's a community and there are projects. And again, we're talking about the community itself, which would not have a -NC for new construction or RD for redevelopment. But for our purposes, we're actually going to use Avalon Towers. And we can see there's already been one accessibility obligation record entered in for the DD review. We're going to go ahead and enter one in for the CD review. To do this, you just click on New. Expand this. And again, it's not a workflow process. It is just create, finish editing, and you can go in and out of it. I'll expand the upper form. And as we work through, obviously any field that's gray is going to auto-populate, so we just need to worry about those that are white, and then specifically those with a red asterisk. If you can, go ahead and add the date that the community was built. So I'm just going to pick a date in here. And then we're keeping the status active. We don't need to inactivate this. We'll move on down to development information. So we'll be right here towards the middle of your screen. And the dev deal tracker is a newer process for us, so you may or may not find one available when you click in. If you do find one available, keep in mind that you want to find the highest version number to select if you pull one in. Next, we're asked if the asset is being developed or acquired, and we'll say this is developed. And then we're asked for the development manager, and this is important for routing purposes. Okay, so I'll click on select. Now, if you've already tried this process and you didn't have access while you were working through it, I'll just take the comment that you have here and I'll work with support to make sure that we get you set up to take care of this process. All right, so I am going to select the development manager. So I'm going to go ahead and just find manager. Pull them in, and then the construction type. And then next, your construction project manager. And that's important as well because let's say that this process kicks off with the development manager. By the time it gets to end, the construction PM will review it and vice versa. So we'll go ahead and select that person, pop that in, and then we'll move on through. All right, so you can put the number of buildings, but it's not a mandatory field. And then if this is new construction or redevelopment, and we'll say this is new construction. And then your review type. So we said this is our CD. All right, and then your review date. So this part's really important because this is going to be what kicks off the review record. So you'll want to make sure you're very thoughtful about this. For our purposes, I'm just going to say today, and I'm actually going to say 12 p.m. and OK. And then next you can describe any, then we need to say the type. So you would look through these options and select whatever type makes sense. If you have any additional information you need to add, you could add it here. That's really all there is to this record. As soon as you're done filling it in, you can click on Finish Editing. Now, if there were any issues that you had with it, you could go right back into the record, and this was the CD review. You would click Edit, and then you'd be able to take action on anything that you need to change. And maybe you won't have anything that ever needs to be changed with it, but you do have that option. So just keep that in mind. If you need to change anything around, you would be able to click in, click Edit, and then make any updates. And so if we were to do that, then you just click Finish Editing, and you're on your way. All right, so I'm going to pause for a second and see if there are any questions to this point. Nope. All right. So let me go ahead and switch back over here. So that's really how simple it is to create the obligation record. You really just go in, you say, hey, this is some information about this, and this is the date that I need to kick off either the CD, the DD, the framing, or the final, and you're done with it. Once that date rolls around, then a task will be created, an email will be generated for you to start the accessibility review process. So let's take a look at that. Again, it's based on the review type and the date, what happens next. And let's take a look at a few of the options on here. So let's say that it goes for either DD or CD. First thing it'll do is go to the development or the redevelopment manager before it goes to the third party. So it's coming to you as a development or redevelopment manager, and you're going to push it to the third party. And once they have the record, they're going to upload their report and add the action line items before they push it back to you. And then you can work with the design consultant as needed before you push it on to the PM. And after the PM signs off, it goes to end. So that's the path there. If instead we were going to go for framing, that looks just a little bit different. So the framing starts with the construction PM. They push it on to the third-party accessibility consultants, who then will push it back to the construction PM before you go back and forth with the design consultant as needed, and then on to the development or redevelopment manager before it goes to end. And then lastly, if it's the final walk, kicks off to the construction PM, goes to the third party. They send it to the construction PM, again, back to the design consultant for review before it goes to the manager for approval, design director for approval, SVP, and then Dev VP before going to end. So this one has a little bit different path. All right, so let's take a look in I-beam. And again, if you give me just a moment to switch this over. And let me sign in. And I mentioned that there are going to be the email notifications. So I'm going to show you one of those first. So here's our email notification that came to us. And as always, it comes from Unifier. And it said that the accessibility review was sent to you for development, redevelopment manager review. Now this is O2 dev review. So that means it's coming to you before you send it off to the third party. And then when they're done and it comes to you again, it'll say for O4 review, second review. And then you could just click here to log in to take action. So we'll come in. And here's our obligation that's been set up. And then under accessibility review, we see our new record. So this record was already in flight, and now we have our new one specific to the CB review. All right, so we'll double click to go in. And first thing we'll do is accept the task. Really, all we're looking for here is to get this record over to the third-party consultant to kick off their processes, right? So you can see that there's a lot of gray on this form. There aren't fields for you to take action on up above, but where you want to pay special attention is right here, where it's saying go ahead and send this to your third-party consultant. So first, we're going to click Select, and if you're on the West Coast, this would be Endelman and Associates. If you're on the East Coast, this would be Environetics. And I'll share with you that both of them have parties that have already worked through this process in production. So we've already had our first records that have kicked off that they have touched. We'll click on Select. Now, for our purposes in this training database, I'm going to pick a different vendor, but you would select one of those. And then the primary contact, who does this need to go to? I'm going to click Select, the proper person, and I have the ability to add a work phone number if I need to. All right, so don't miss this part because we're going to come down to action details, and you can see that when we select our workflow action of send to third-party consultants, it's going to auto-populate that it's going to the vendor. And when you're ready, you can click on Send. All right, looking to see if there are any additional questions that have come up. All right, so now this record has gone over to our third-party accessibility consultant. And so just to give you a sense, that would be the party that tells us, hey, these are the accessibility items that you need to make sure are considered in the design drawings and in everything that we do. So then it comes to us, and then we send it forward, not to the person that we've contracted specifically for those purposes, but for our design consultants that make sure that everything gets addressed and handled. So it's two different companies. And get in here. And Danielle, I see your question. I'm going to have to look at yours specifically. All right, so now I am the vendor. I have received the email notification to let me know that I have a task to complete. That task is visible on my Home tab and here on my Community tab. And we can see that this one right here is awaiting my let's take a look real quick at this log view because you're about to see it change after I do some work here. As we go across, you can see the status, obviously. And then you can also see total number of action items, what's completed and what's pending. The total number is 0 because we haven't added any. But once, as the consultant, I add those action items, then you're going to see that number increase. So it makes sense that it's 0 right now because we have not added them yet. So let's go ahead and take a look at that just so you know what takes place. So I'll go into the record and I'll accept the task. Again, the vendors that we're utilizing, the third-party consultants, have already been through this process and I've been working with them. So I'm not going to spend too much time explaining this piece that you all don't have to do. I just want you to see what it looks like real quick. They'll come through, and the first thing it asks them is, are all action items uploaded? And right now we haven't added any, so that's what we need to do, and we're doing it for them on an import. So let me get my import buttons to show here. Come down to accessibility action item, and my buttons are hiding. There we go. So instead of adding one by one, I'm going to click import. And then they can click right here to select a file. They select their file and click next, and then they'll click upload. And this takes an extra second compared to what we're used to for adding contracts and such, but it's really a relatively quick process. All of their line items drop in. So each of these line items is an action item, right? So these are the ones we need to review. They all go in as pending so that they can come back to us for a response and or action taken. So now in the upper form, I can say, yes, I've added all of those items, but it's also asking me if I have attached the full report. And I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the add attachment, my computer. So I'll browse, and then I can just pull in my report. And I'd upload. So now the third-party consultant to say, yes, I've added both the action items and the full report. They also can provide a specific location. There's an area to provide an even more specific location within the action line items. So this can be more generic as needed. Okay? So we have all of that information in. And when they click submit then, it's going to move on back to the manager to review the information that they've added. I see a few questions coming in. We're going to answer those towards the end. I don't want you to think that we're not going to get to them. All right. So now, as a third party, I've entered all of this information, and I'm ready to send it forward. And now you can see it's with the Dev Manager for review. Right, so let's take a look at what the Dev Manager sees. We can sign out here. At that point, as the Dev Manager, I receive an email notification that I have another task. The task can be found on my homepage, and it can be found here on the community. And while we're in here, you can see that we have our record. I'm going to double click to go in. And of course, accept task. So now at this point, I have the ability to just gather some information through here and note this section where it says Design Consultant Response. Are all of the action items complete? That's important because you might keep this record for a while and work on it. You might want to go ahead and send it to the design consultant, and the action items are not complete. You just need to send it to them for a little bit, and then they can send it back to you. You can come down to the accessibility action items, and this example is 87. I've seen some that were 115. So of course, you're all familiar with how that varies and that we normally use that in Excel. But what we have available for you, instead of opening up every single one, you might consider using this grid function. And so in the grid function, You're able to double click on a line item to look at it if you need to see more information. If there is something that runs over so you can't see all of the verbiage, you can just hover over it. So that's another trick to be able to see everything that's in there. If you are making any updates, always make sure you click Save. And I didn't make any updates. The other thing that's important to know is that you can come up to File, Print Preview, and then I would choose HTML. You can play with it, but this is the one that I think works really well. And then I don't really want the upper form information. I'm just interested in the detailed action items. So I'll click OK. And now I have a report that I can print out of all of the line items. So just so you know, that's available for you. Again, in the grid function, the way it's set up is you can just click in to the cell and say if it's completed, and then give your response, any correction taken, and save. And I'll close the window. Now, just for the sake of time, instead of sending it to the design consultant and back, we're going to go ahead and say we approve this one. Okay? And now that we're approving it, we can see that this is going to go to the PM for review. So I'll go ahead and click on Send. All right, so now it's in approval, but it's waiting for the PM. So I'll sign out here. And as the PM, I've received the email notification that I have an open task. I'll come to the community. I can double click in and accept my task. Now at this point, you'll see that all of these fields are grayed out. And if you come to the accessibility action items and look at grid, you'll be able to see all of the information. This is also a quick shortcut in case any of the corrective actions or responses are longer than the columns allow for, then you can just hover. You could also print the report that I showed you so that you can review everything. But let me click into one. What you'll notice is you don't have the ability to adjust anything. So I'm clicking in and I'm not able to change anything. So if there's something that you feel like needs revision or if you need some clarification, you can come to General Comments, click Add, add your comments, click OK, close this window, and then I could return for clarification if I need to. So let me show you under Action Details. There's return for clarification. It goes back to the manager. Or I could just go ahead and say complete. And it notifies all of these different individuals before I click send and send it to end. So before I send it, I'm going to pause there and see what questions we have to see if there's anything that I'm able to answer now or if we're going to go ahead and answer it just at the end here. Give me a second as I scroll through. And I see a question wondering if there's a way to distribute this. And I'm sorry, I didn't see your question when you first typed it. I wasn't looking at the question part. But if you could let me know at what part, specifically at what timing you're thinking about sending it to them, then we can address that. All right, so then I would click on Send. And now we can see this one has been completed. So we have our accessibility obligation, which was our scheduler that kicked off the process. It kicked off a review. here's our review. It was created by the admin. I'll make this bigger. It was created by the admin, and then it went on to the dev director. And keep in mind, we're just looking at the top workflow here. Then it went to the third party before it went to the dev manager. You can go back and forth for the design consultant before it ultimately comes to the PM to go to end. All right. So a few reminders, and then we'll get to your questions here in a second. Existing projects in Lotus Notes do remain in Lotus Notes, but all new projects moving forward should use the I-beam for their accessibility reviews. Some resources you have available to you. There are written instructions. There's some attached in the webinar, and then they're also found in the help directly within I-beam. And I'm going to go ahead and send out the latest and greatest documents for everybody after we're done with our call and we have the recording available. The policy is located in SharePoint. And then in AVBU, we do have an asset management section specific to accessibility where you'll see Anna and Susie's announcement as well as some links to some helpful documents and some videos on how to. Those are in there for you. And who do you ask if you have questions? So if it's specific to I-beam, then of course reach out to I-beam through the helpline at either extension 3000 or the toll-free number. And for accessibility policy questions, then obviously reach out to Susie or Anna in design. But let's go ahead and get to some of your questions because I want to make sure that we get those answered. So Anna, I'm not sure if you can see the questions, but I can certainly read them and see if you can help me answer them.
Yeah, we can't see the questions on our side, but yeah, if you just want to read them out and then if you need us to answer them, we'll get them.
All right, perfect. Skipping anything I've already answered. Can you provide maybe a better description of the difference between AVB Design Consultant Group versus the third-party designer group versus the third-party consultant group?
So the third-party accessibility consultant is the accessibility consultant, so either Environetics or Endelman. The design consultant is your architect. But in some cases, if it's really, some of the citations in the report are about the site, sidewalks and slopes, the design consultant could very well be the civil engineer or the landscape architect. Sometimes the design consultant could be the interior designer. So that's why we generally call it design consultant, because although most of the time it's going to be your architect, sometimes it'll be one of your other designers on the team.
Okay.
And then I don't know, what's the last one? The third group?
There was third-party designer versus third-party consultant.
Yeah, so third-party consultant is supposed to be the third-party accessibility consultant, and then third-party designer is supposed to be the architect, or in some few cases, the civil, landscape, or interior designer.
Thank you. And again, Danielle, I'll look at your question specifically since it's about a live record in production and get back with you on that. Another question for you all. The accessibility review policy, does that apply to new development and redevelopment and CapEx?
It does apply to new development and redevelopment. Redevelopment, talk to us before you set up your review in I-beam, because depending on the age of the property and who built it, the scope of the review is going to be different. So if you guys remember the part where Casey was showing you a drop-down menu of the type of review, and it said FHA only, ADA only, FHA, ADA, and local codes, for redev, that's going to be different depending on the property itself. So we can help you select which one you need. But if you're new construction, you're always going to choose FHA, ADA, and local accessibility codes. Every review for new construction is going to be everything. And then CapEx CapEx, this does not apply to CapEx, but I guess depending on the scope of the CapEx project, we can just treat that as a case-by-case, and you can reach out to Anna and myself, and we can determine if an accessibility review is needed, but 99% of the time, this will not apply to CapEx.
Thank you. There's a question about, is there a way that I can pull the accessibility review line items in a report format? And yes, while you're on the record, it's just print preview. I suggest you go to HTML, so that is available for you. Is there a way, and this goes to you, Susie and Anna, is there a way to forward and distribute this to all of our subcontractors on the project for addressing? Typically, they're responsible for addressing and responding prior to ABB construction, accepting and reporting to the report.
That's a great question. Casey, I don't know. Do we have the capability to forward to vendors? And if we don't, then that might be the next improvement that we make to this BP.
Okay, and so I'm going to double check something for us, and I'm not going to show you on the screen until I get there, but there was a clarification. He's asking specifically after we get everything from Endelman.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's kind of similar to after we get everything from Endelman or Mike Mays, you know, we're either sending it out to the architect who can help us address some of the issues, or we may also be sending it to these vendors/subcontractors for their help as well. So, yeah, Casey, we may need to see if we can build that into the BP.
Okay, and so I'm going to look at
if we don't already have it.
Because staging, I'm in the training database, and it doesn't work exactly like production is going to work just because of the way that we prep it for these, but so I'm going to take a look here. So if we're at this step and we want to forward it on, it really is just to design consultant or approved. There's not an option specifically to a vendor, but you do get to select your two. So I think it is something that we would want to build into it so that it doesn't say it's going to design consultant when it's going to a vendor. And there's not a CC option to give them a heads up.
Okay, gotcha. So in the meantime, what we would do, what you guys would do on the phone, is you could either send the PDF full report to your subs, because as Casey showed you guys, Endelman and Mike Mays are going to be attaching the full report PDF to the record anyway. So you always have the option of sending your subs that document offline, and they can get back to you with your responses, and then somebody on the project team, whether it's yourself, the construction PM, the development manager, or an admin, somebody on the ABB team can go ahead and input what the subcontractor's resolution is for them. So we can do that. We can always do that in the meantime.
Excellent. And then the second part of the question was, it would be great if those subs had a column to enter their responses in here as well when we send it to them. Mm-hmm. So phase two.
Phase two. That's a great suggestion. Mm-hmm. We're going to start working on it.
Excellent. There's a question when you're selecting what type of review it is. So just as you were touching on earlier, if it was the ADH or all of the various ones it could be, how does somebody know which one to choose for their community?
Yeah.
For their community.
That's when you can reach out to myself or Anna at any time, because they definitely can get confusing on what the scope should be for your accessibility consultant, and we can help you guys determine that. Like I said, if it's new construction, and Casey, I don't know if maybe you can show them that drop down again, but if it's new construction, it's going to be the line item that has the trio, FHA, ADA, and local code. If it's redev, it could be any of the variations in the drop-down menu. So the third one down, FHA, ADA, and local code, that's going to be what you're going to choose for new construction. And then if you're redev, you might be any of the other options depending on what it is, what the project is. But we can certainly help you determine that.
All right, thank you. Let me see what other questions we have. And there are existing projects in I-Beam. Assuming these existing projects will continue to use Lotus Notes to create accessibility reviews.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So
All right.
if you started in Lotus Notes, you're going to end in Lotus Notes. You'll just continue to use Lotus Notes. If you haven't started any of your accessibility reviews yet on a project, you're going to want to start in I-Beam.
All right, so part 2 of that was, for example, dev pursuits currently active in I-Beam. Because they're dev pursuits and they probably haven't started any of that, they will use I-Beam.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. If you've already begun an accessibility review, does it need to be loaded into I-Beam?
No, no. We're going to archive Lotus Notes for years for legal purposes. And I think for now we've decided that if you started in Lotus Notes, you'll just stay in Lotus Notes and we won't hold the record in I-Beam. We made that decision and we're gonna see how that decision goes, but that's what we've decided currently. So nobody's gonna have to migrate from Lotus Notes over to I-Beam.
And this one is kind of a tag on to what we were talking about, including our vendors. We treat this like a punch list for our field guys, subcontractors to address prior AVB construction accepting and confirming field responses. So we should be able to associate line items to specific vendors and contractors, subcontractors.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just need to keep all of that in mind when we look at what we're going to do for phase 2, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe, Casey, when we start to integrate sending this to subcontractors, we can talk about sending certain line items to subcontractors.
Okay. And so this kind of falls along the same thought. I often have to send to 3 design consultants, the architect, the civil, and the landscape. Because I-Beam is set up that you send it to 1 at a time, is that going to be an issue with meeting any deadlines?
That's a great point. It would be great if we could send to multiple design consultants at one time. So let's talk about that offline, Casey, because they're
okay.
right. We would want to potentially send to an architect and a civil and a landscape. They're all part of the design consultant group. It's just that there's 3 of them, and they all work for different companies. But they all fall under the design consultant box in the workflow.
Yes. Yeah, it's just 1 at a time is how we'd be able to send it today.
Right.
Sounds like both Teresa, who is our configurer and architect of the software, and Wei have some ideas on reporting. So, as far as creating a report that would be easier to use, including for this purpose of sending it to the subs. Question, how would a sub input be added to I-Beam? So I think that's the question of today, we just be adding it for them. We could give them the report or the Excel, have them type in their responses, and then we'd have to enter it for them.
Correct. Yeah. But we have it on the list for phase 2.
Phase 2. Excellent. So I believe I've hit on all of the questions that were out there. If I missed any questions, let me know. Also, I received feedback that I need to make sure that I have the latest and greatest overview handout, so I will email you all and make sure that you have that as opposed to just the one that's attached here. Are there any other questions?
And while we're waiting for other questions, if there are any, I just want to stress that we do want feedback from the users on this process, because this is the first iteration, obviously, that we're sending out, and you guys have already come up with some great improvements for phase 2. So keep the comments coming as you guys start to use this in I-Beam, because again, this is just version 1, so we'll just want to continually improve on this process as we use it. So appreciate all the feedback.
All right, so only one other question I'm sorry, I'm going to backtrack for just a second. The person who had asked how we put the sub input into I-Beam, and then it says where is that entered. So it would be, let's say that the development manager has the record. So I'm going to go to an accessibility review. Today, the way that would look is here within the record, if the sub is supplying information for us, then within the grid, or if you want to do it just line by line, you could put ABB response or corrective action taken, and you would just want to say something along the lines of per sub or whatever. But we did have a question earlier if we could have a separate column for that, which we don't today. So that's where it would be entered. And then we were asked, when is phase 2 expected to be issued? And I don't want to speak for Susie, but I'm guessing we'll probably want to spend a little bit of time working as is to see what else needs to be in phase 2. Anything you'd want to add to that, Susie?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh.
No, I think you covered it. Yeah, I think we're gonna we'll just have to talk offline, Casey, and see what we want to put into phase 2, or what we can put into phase 2. But I think in the meantime, we definitely have some workarounds to keep the current process going. But we'll try to automate it into I-Beam with the next iteration.
All right. And there's one more that was entered. It says, Olson with subcontractors, we have also asked architect and consultants to address in the field considering it's design related. So I guess something to specify, hey, this is design related.
Yeah, so they're asking if we can flag something as design related?
That's the way I take it. And if Bill, you're on the line, if you want to add any clarification, you're welcome to.
And Casey, can you read that one more time?
Mm-hmm. Along with subcontractors, we have also asked the architect and the consultants to address for us in the field if it's design related. Yeah.
So that is the intent. When we forward the items that the accessibility consultant cited over to the architect or other design consultants, right now we're forwarding everything over to them, and we're just expecting them to kind of go through every line item and addressing any that are design related. So we're not calling out which ones are design related, but we're just basically putting it on the architect to identify which ones are design related for them to address. So Casey, we could talk about maybe there is a way for our teams to flag which ones are design related, but that just, the downside to that is that puts more work on somebody on our team, when I think we can probably trust the architect to pull out which line items pertain to them. But we can see how it goes.
All right, and so I'll take all of the comments that we have submitted regarding our potential phase 2, any of those, and I'll make sure that we retain those for when we're looking at our next steps for the accessibility processes.
Mm-hmm. Yep, great.
All right, so I don't see any new questions that have come through. There's another comment, and again, Bill, I'll include that as we look forward to phase 2. So unless there's another question that comes through, I again just want to express how much I appreciate everybody taking the time to jump on this call. And I'll send out a reminder email probably by the end of the week just saying, hey, don't forget this is where some resources are, the updated handout, and the video has been posted to AVBU. Any other closing comments?
No.
All
And
right.
thanks, Casey, for running the tutorial.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. All right. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your